Well, good evening. I'm Marlon Bowling, and welcome to this Future Farm special. Tonight, we're discussing data-driven nutritionals and biologicals, focusing on the proven improvements in crop performance by Rob Seco. We'll explore seed performance and how modern agricultural technologies, such as drones and irrigation monitors, optimize crop yields. Joining us are three expert guests to share insights from pre-planting to harvest, including Rob Robinson. He's the CEO, Jim Robinson, Chief Technology Officer, and Todd Clausen, Agronomy Manager. Thanks, guys, for being here. I appreciate all of you being on board with us. Looking forward to this 2-hour edition. And you guys have been very busy this year with Future Farm. And Rob, I guess I want to start out the segment by pitching it to you and help our audience get familiar with you and how you got to where you are in this position at the company here.
Well, I grew up in the seed business, so I've been in it over 40 years, and the biological business is new to me. It's been a lot of fun. We've had that for about 3 years now, a little over 2, actually. And the founder of the new Rob Seco, which we started 10 years ago, and I provide kind of direction and for the organization. That's my responsibility.
Interesting stuff. Boy, the business has changed so much. I farmed about 20 years ago. And the difference between back then and now is just amazing. So I bet you're glad to be a part of that and experience that in person.
I am. It's been interesting, a lot of fun. First going through biotechnology and traits, and now going through kind of the addition of biologicals. It's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I want to turn to Jim. Same last name. That's interesting.
We
Jim
might
Robinson.
Share a little bit of germplasm back.
Yeah.
A few genetics.
I like the way you put that. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's kind of a clue as to what you do. Explain your role.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Chief Technology Officer at Rob Seco. I have a background in genetics, as you might imagine. I oversee the product management group, product strategy, cover corn directly, and help out overall with whatever I can help with.
Interesting stuff. So we've seen your videos on our own Market Day report from time to time, and very educational stuff. I really enjoy that. Todd, of course, Todd Clausen, you've been with the company for a while. Explain your role.
So, and thanks for having us, Martin.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Todd Clausen. So I lead our agronomy department, and I'm basically just an old farm boy from Nebraska, and I'm probably the cheapest German farmer I know. So getting great products and great direction and good performance and good return on investment for our farmers is really where my direction is. I've been in the agronomy business for almost 35 years, and I'm really pleased to be back with this group and be a part of this Future Farm organization. And I really help and work day to day on the farm during the growing season. So I have the opportunity to get to help manage as it goes from cradle to grave.
Well, interesting stuff. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and we have plenty of time to do it, too. So, Rob, let's talk about the primary focus of Rob Seco and how it fits into the agricultural landscape right now.
We're an organization that's focused on corn, soybean, sorghum, and alfalfa from a seed viewpoint. We also have an wholly owned subsidiary called Streamline, and Streamline is focused on kind of unique and interesting combinations of biologicals, nutritionals, kind of new things that are coming into the market today, and that provide some real value. And so, we have 3 pillars, as we say. We focus on keeping things simple, on strong relationships with our customers, and on great products, technology. And as Todd mentioned before, things that provide a great return on investment.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim, can you give us a quick overview, if you would, on the technological advances that you've had at Rob Seco here? You've been very involved in that.
Absolutely. So we've had the chance not only to help introduce new traits into the corn and soybean marketplaces, but also a lot of these products with Streamline Ag that interact really well with those genetics that we sell for corn, soybeans, alfalfa, and sorghum. And so these new biologicals that are coming forward, we see that interaction between not just the germplasm, but also the soil biology, the organic matter, and ultimately what drives the success for farmers, and that is yield.
All right. Well, Todd, let's talk about the future farming segments. How does it actually tie into Rob Seco's future with these future farm segments you guys have been working on?
When we think about the future farm, it's a breeding ground. And we like to say it ain't good because we say it is, good because we have the opportunity to prove it. And so we take not just our genetic products, but we're tying them with what we call seed-driven crop inputs, marry them together to enhance, not mask a genetic flaw, but we want to enhance the production of that genetics, of that germplasm to reach its maximum potential. It'll never reach its full potential, but we want it to reach its maximum potential.
Sounds good. Well, we started the Future Farm segments with building the foundation for next year's crop. And let's get started by looking back at the residue management segment.
All right, Jim, we're talking about building the foundation, and one of the important aspects of that is residue management. And you know, through my career in the seed industry, I remember hearing about residue management, but not like you hear about it today. It seems more critical. And why is that?
You know, a lot has progressed since you started your career in the seed industry.
Okay.
Yields
All
have
right.
gone way up, and in order to get those yields, you actually have to plant a lot more plants per acre. So you know what that creates is more residue. With every bushel of corn that you produce, you're producing about 44 pounds of residue on each acre.
You know, I remember when we used to plant 15,000 per acre. We thought that was a lot, and it's nothing today. Well, good. Well, what are some of the methods? You know, how do we manage this residue?
Yeah, so you know, there's on a 200 bushel crop, you have to manage about 9,000 pounds of residue, and so there are a lot of different ways to manage residue. There's basically two extremes. There's one extreme that is conventional tillage, where you're basically making multiple tillage passes in order to incorporate that residue into the soil, where it'll break down faster and not be a nuisance as you're planting your next crop. On the other end, there is no-till, where you basically don't do anything about that residue and you plant into the soil, trying to avoid the majority of that residue to get the best seed establishment. Now, both sides have their issues. Conventional tillage, you're actually degrading your soil health by exposing that soil, reducing the amount of organic matter, less biological activity. But on the other end, with no-till, you're actually decreasing the performance of the seed you plant because it takes a longer period of time for that soil to warm up. You're also decreasing seed to soil contact because you may get hairpinning, where you plant through residue and that seed actually doesn't contact the soil because it's hairpinned between the residue. So we have to look at other ways to manage this.
All right, so let's talk about this here. Jim, what are the procedures and the innovations that you have come up with to manage residue on the Future Farm?
Yeah, so in order to get that best start possible on Future Farm, we used a product that we call residue release in order to introduce live biology onto that crop residue. And really what we wanted to do is accelerate the breakdown of the residue in order to improve planting and help release nutrients.
So what's in these products?
Yeah, so residue release contains a consortium of bacteria that all work together to do a number of things, but also a surfactant that helps that bacteria really penetrate into the residue in order to maximize the surface area that it can start acting on the residue and break it down.
All right, so this gets kind of involved. Todd, can you kind of analyze how they actually work? How do they break down the material and the biologicals actually work?
So this group of microbials, this group of bacteria, they really work in three different directions. So number one, it's to initiate that decay, that decomposure of that material that was left by the previous crop. And what you see, you know, on the screen right now, well, obviously it's corn. And so we want to begin that ensiling process and that breakdown as early as we possibly can. Number two, we want to lessen the burden and lessen the buffer that this residue has on the soil for the next year's crop. Because the more pressure, the more blanket of residue you have out there, the slower that the soils will warm up and the lower the crop or the lesser the crop conditions. And then number three, what we like to see is the breakdown of these big complex carbon compounds. We break them down into small pieces, and you break them down into smaller sugar compounds that can be consumed by the total life of the bacteria in that soil. And you think about having 200 bushel corn on your farm, 250 bushel corn. You got these stalks out there that are just tough. They'll puncture a hole in your truck tire, right?
Yeah.
And so what makes them up? Well, it's made up of millions and millions of cells. What these bacteria will do is you think about the cell, you think about the cell wall and the structure of that cell. is driven by cellulose, and the strength or the turgidity of that cell is driven by lignin. Well, this group of bacteria will jump in there and will help and will colonize on those cells. They'll reproduce. They'll basically dissolve, so they'll feed on that cellulose and that lignin, those big carbon compounds, and then they will excrete then inorganic compounds that are uptakeable and obtainable by the crop, and again by the total, what I would call the microbial community of the soil.
How does that all tie in with the genetics? I noticed that even when I was farming, and they were starting to come up with GMO corn back then. I'm really dating myself. But even way back then, it was like you said, the stalks were real tough. Sometimes if you turn livestock out there, they didn't even want to eat it. You know, it was so tough. And I just wondered how that all ties into the genetics nowadays. If they're breeding for that in the plant lines, or how does that all come about?
Well, it's not necessarily genetic driven, genetic specific. These bacteria will work on really any large complex carbons, and so when you think about crop residue, whether it be corn stalks like we were just showing, or whether it be stalks of cotton that are just like trees, or even if it's soybean residue, these bacteria will help that in-cell process. They'll help break down that material, decay and decompose earlier, and that in doing so you leave a better seed bed for the following season. You have greater tilth in the soil, and then frankly, as you break down those big carbon compounds, you break them into small obtainable food source or biostimulants for the microbial community that lives in the soil that is out there by the trillions.
Mm-hmm. How far along do you think we are in that development right now? I mean, are we just barely breaking into it a little bit?
You know, residue digesters have been part of the industry for a number of years now. And what's different, what we think is different about our products is that they're natural. So these aren't GMOs, these aren't foreign material, they're natural soil-borne bacteria.
Good point.
And but they're sporulated. Now sporulated is a big word, but what does that mean? So think about a fermentation lab, and we're in the lab and we're building this big population of bacteria. We build it up to trillions and trillions and trillions, and what we'll do is that we'll start to limit their food source. We'll titrate their food source back. They'll get more and more defensive until they go dormant. They're still alive.
Well, welcome back to this Future Farm Special. Tonight, we are discussing data-driven nutritionals and biologicals, focusing on the proven improvements in crop performance by the folks at Rob Seco. And we're now discussing in crop residue and nutritional release. Well, Jim, what reduction in crop residue and nutritional release have you seen in the treated fields here so far?
You know, we've actually seen quite a bit, but to give you some context on what it could look like, just think about your typical bushel of corn. It takes about 44 pounds of residue in order to produce that bushel of corn.
Okay.
So if you think 200 bushel corn, there's about 9,000 pounds of residue on that field at the end of the year that needs to break down in some way, shape, or form. So if we apply residue release, we can actually reduce the total weight of that residue by about 27%, which would be 2,400 pounds of residue out of the total of 9,000. Now, that's going to release an awful lot of minerals and nutrients for the plant to then use during the growing season. So, you know, within the 2,400 pounds of residue that's broken down, that's going to be about 14.8 pounds of nitrogen, about 3 pounds of phosphorus, and 2.8 pounds of potassium. But the potassium is actually going to be in a form that's going to be about 3 times as uptakeable as your typical potash may be, which ends up resulting altogether as about $18 to $36 worth of fertility in the soil that gets
Really?
released much earlier in the season than would be without a product like residue released.
Interesting. And you've been able to help build on that here recently with your new innovations then.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, the use of those surfactants within the residue release helps, you know, really cause that breakdown to accelerate much faster. But then also, you know, a number of the other products that we can incorporate into overall, you know, not just help improve the overall fertility, but the planting of those products as well through that residue.
Well, let's carry this on through a little bit here. And Rob, I'll turn to you. So nutritional release, how does that apply to the crop that's going to be coming up next year then? That's a very critical, important part.
Well, obviously, and the availability is a part of that too. So we've seen yield increases after the use of this residue management tool or biological, for several reasons. Number one, we talked about a better seed bed, right? When you break down all of that residue, 44 pounds per bushel of production, you have a much better planting seed bed in the spring. And so we see better planting accuracy, less hairpinning, and better stands, better first day emergence, and as a result of that, we see some additional yields as a result of the better stands. And then the release of nutrients, we talked about that before. We see some yield improvement and better nutrient availability for that growing crop as a result of that nutrient release in the breakdown of the residue.
Now, for our uninitiated out there, you might explain to our audience what you mean when you say hairpinning. Some of our folks at home may go,
Hairpinning
"What?"
is simply when the planter encounters a piece of residue that then traps a seed inside that piece of residue when it tries to actually accurately plant the seed in the soil.
Now, why is that important?
Well, because then you need good seed soil contact to get accurate uniform stands. And when you have hairpinning, that particular seed doesn't come up in time, if it comes up at all, because you don't have good seed soil contact. So you get skips and you get variability, reduced stand as a result of that. And so we all know that picket fence kinds of stands that all come up the same day are where we get our highest yields.
Right, exactly, yeah. So you have to counter this all against whatever fertilizer you're going to have to put on in the spring as well. I mean, that nutritional breakdown that you talk about from the previous crop, that's all going to have to be factored in. If you can get it to break down right, you're not going to need to fertilize as much, right?
Well, theoretically, no. We don't recommend reduction in fertility as a result of the use of this product. We think the benefits are in having more available nutrients that are immediately available in a more available form, and then uniformity of stand and emergence. We think those are where the real benefits come with this product.
All right, Todd, let's turn over to you on this topic here. How much potential do you think that actually adds to our yield on the crop?
So as a farmer, and if we're going to focus, let's just focus on corn. When you plant corn, your objective should be every plant look like every other plant. You want establishment, number one, and then you want uniformity from plant to plant to plant, number two. And so when we think about conditions, we plant corn by conditions. We plant soybeans by date, but we plant corn by conditions. And when we think about, you have greater establishment from seed to seedling emergence, and the more plants per acre that you can get to, it's worth, every 1,000 is worth about 8 bushel per acre. And now when you think about that uniformity from plant to plant to plant to plant, in general, when we plant corn in the upper Midwest, it takes about 5 to 5.5 days for all of the corn to emerge. Not from the time I plant it to the time it comes out of the ground, but from the time it first starts to emerge until you've exhausted all the emergence, right? And so if you have separation, so day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you think about the separation or the penalty for coming up 2 days later, it's about 100 kernels on a corn ear that puts on 650 kernels.
Really?
So you've got establishment on the number of plants per acre is a huge value. And then the uniformity of plant to plant to plant, like Rob mentioned, that picket fence. You want every plant to look like every other plant.
So this is interesting. You were talking about the biologicals and how you want to help the plants all break down and everything. One thing you have to keep in mind as well is with the new modern technology, look how fast these planters go nowadays.
Oh, absolutely.
You really have to have that soil in better shape just to make that stuff work at optimal performance, right? That's where your technology angle comes in, I guess.
Exactly, and with those high-speed planters, there's a high degree of accuracy that needs to happen for every
Right.
seed to get to the right spot in the soil. So the more force it takes to get through that residue, the less accurate you can be, because you can find spots where residue's piled up, or maybe it's gone bare because it's windblown, and if you can break down enough of that so it reduces the down pressure required, you can get a much more accurate seed placement with those high-speed planters.
So did you see evidence of that on Future Farm?
We did. We saw some really nice evidence of the speed to emergence being highly consolidated into the first day of emergence, and that was just one of the really nice benefits of having less residue to break through.
Where we've measured the down pressure required, Marlon, in many fields it takes 200 to 250 pounds of down pressure to plant. And in a field that's been treated properly with residue release, it can take less than 100. And so there is physical evidence about what the difference using products like this can make in terms of planting accuracy and just seed bed preparation.
Well, now that would translate into less drag on the tractor too.
Absolutely, and less wear on equipment, wear and tear, period. Less horsepower, less fuel as well.
I didn't mean to cut you off. You were going to make a point there.
I just made it.
Oh, didn't mean to jump the gun there, but yeah, that is something that you were talking about, the biologicals and how important they are nowadays. Farmers just have to make every penny count. I mean, you have to be as efficient as you possibly can now, and all of these factors have to come into play here to get that crop in right. And this spring was a prime example. Not everybody had good planting conditions either. So how big of a factor was that? Did these play a role in that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if your seed bed, if your field's not covered with as much residue, as Todd mentioned earlier, warms up quicker, and you have a better seed bed to plant into, and when the conditions are tough, and you're in a rush to get things done because planting's late, that's exactly what you need is a seed bed that's ready to go, that's warmed up, that you can plant into accurately.
Well, Todd, I came from Kansas and on the Nebraska border originally, but you've heard, I'm sure.
I've heard of Kansas.
Yeah, I know you know how dry it has been out there for several years. But did that come to the detriment of biologicals and the way that they work? I mean, how do you work around that anyway?
And so when you think about those dry conditions and that material remains on the soil surface, you don't have the temperature, or you have the temperature, but you don't have the moisture for the naturally occurring bacteria to start breaking that down. And really, when you leave residue on the surface, it basically just succumbs to weathering, like a rock does. It gets cold, it gets warm, it gets wet, it gets ice, and all of those things. But the real bacterial and microbial activity that breaks down and ensiles residue is down here underneath and in the soil. And so what these products can do is they can help instigate and initiate that initial colonization of natural bacteria to start to decompose that on the surface, particularly in drier weathers. Though using these products in extremely dry weather, you still have to have growing conditions for them to colonize and be able to reproduce and thrive. In extremely dry conditions, we will get lower examples and lower advance of that decomposure.
Jim, what surprised you most on Future Farm this year? All the research you had to do there. Did you have some curveballs that you maybe had to contend with a little bit?
Oh, my biggest thing is, it's the proof is in the pudding. And so what surprised me most are, the visuals that you get out of, what we've seen with products like residue release, and that you can be just a couple of weeks after application and start to see the colonization of the bacteria and then the saprophytic fungi that come in after to help break down the residue. You really start to see that visually just after a couple of weeks of reasonably good weather. And then, not only that, but once we move into early emergence, you really see the uniformity of emergence, which is striking to see in person.
Well, Rob, it was a challenging year to say the least. And I just wondered what you took away from the growing season in 2023 on Future Farm there.
Well, I think, you know what I was surprised with? I was surprised with the return on investment with some of these products. I expected them to work, but I didn't expect them to work this well. And so, when we talk about residue release and some of the other products we have, I was really impressed with how well they worked and the kind of return we can get out of them. I mean, we have products we're showing 5x return on investment, and I think those are the kind of products in today's environment, commodity price environment that people want. Yeah. I mean, that's what you invest in today's environment.
So even in a tough environment, you have proven that you really can get your money back and get
Yeah.
really good value out of technology you can apply.
And we'll be talking about some of these other products as we go along here that showed, Residue Release showed a really nice return. We have some others that showed great returns as well that
Awesome.
just surprised me. These are naturally occurring microbes. I think Todd said this earlier, and so they are in the soils. It's just they aren't in the soils in the numbers that we used to have. I mean, this is what soil health is all about. The reason we talk about soil health. And some of them are fairly rare in these soils, and so when we put them in there with these products in large quantities, it's surprising what they can actually do.
Interesting stuff. Well, we need to head to another break, but coming up, we'll be highlighting the importance of establishing early strength with your crop. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this Future Farm special. The next portion of Future Farm is focused on establishing early strength. Here is a clip from the Future Farm segment.
Well, Todd, we've emphasized a lot about the importance of having a strong, vigorous, uniform stand in corn and what the importance of that may be. But really, what I want to talk to you about today is, can you show us what that means and then ultimately what it results in?
Yeah, you bet. So our objective when we plant corn should be to get every plant to look like every other plant. It's imperative. Uniformity plant to plant, that consistency plant to plant makes a difference. Not just the seed to seedling ratio. You put in 35,000 seeds, you want 35,000 to come up, which rarely happens. But overall, not just getting the establishment, it's getting that uniformity from plant to plant to plant. And there's a lot of factors, a lot of parameters that play into that. But as we've talked about, the stimulation and the support and the protection of our seedlings is what we want to show today.
All right. Well, Todd, tell me more about what you mean when you say stimulate, support, and protect. What do you mean by that?
So if we can just be simple and continue to talk about corn, what type of potential yield, bushels per acre, do we have in corn? We know that the U.S. record is just over 600 bushel per acre. And when you think about that, you have to think, did they get it all? Did they get all the potential that was out there? And that answer is no. So there's somewhere around 700 bushel potential, maybe 750 bushel potential, genetically speaking. Well, we can't increase or enhance the ability of that crop to increase its yield. All we can do is support it, stimulate it, and protect it. So we support it by supplementing its daily needs. Corn doesn't want to have a lot of bad days. So we try to, corn's alive for about 140 days. And there are some segments in there that are terribly important. That first 20 days, that middle 20 days, and that last 20 days. But we want to create a smoother ride to the end of its life. So we need to support that. And then when we talk about stimulation, we can help stimulate in tough conditions. Think about early spring. Even in Kansas, if you're planting in April, soil temperatures are 45, 47, 48 degrees. And in other parts of the world, they're cool and wet. But in those type of conditions, the growth pattern, even though there's tissue above ground, the growth pattern is very slow. So if we can stimulate that effect, if we can help cells divide and put more structure onto that plant, we can help stimulate it. And then protection, really that's all we do is protect the raw innate intrinsic capability of genetics to perform. And we protect it in a number of ways.
I've always heard the maximum yield potential of a kernel of corn is when it's in the bag.
Absolutely.
It never gets any better.
Never gets better.
No, that's
It
right.
can only go downhill from there.
So once again, we always think that we're increasing yield, and we're not. We're protecting the raw ability.
Yeah. All right. So, Jim, what innovative products really helped you here on Future Farm this year?
Yeah, we used a product called Tune-Up Plus Corn in order to deliver microbes onto the seed and also help seed fluency so that it flows through the planter. And actually, I have a example
we have
of that
toys.
here.
All right.
There we go.
All right. Props.
So-
Look at that.
Yes. So this would be the Tune-Up Plus corn pail. And this pail itself will treat a box of corn or 50 units. So about, the 125 acres worth of corn or so. And what this pail has is on the inside of the pail, we would have talc graphite mixture. within a couple of other things in it too, such as zinc and some micronutrients. But what's really unique about this pail are these tabs up top, these actual buttons up top that we have, that all you have to do is take off the little yellow clip, and then you would pop down the button itself in order to release microbes into the talc graphite mixture. Because what happens is that talc graphite will actually desiccate bacteria and cause it to then no longer be alive by the time it gets onto the seed and into the soil. So we want to do this as close to planting as possible. And so if you were to push down on the button, shake up the tub in order to get everything thoroughly mixed, and then go through your talc applicator to get it onto the seed, that's exactly what we want to do because it's so close to planting. And then you can see we don't have just one button, but we actually have three. So the first button in the pail will release Terrasym, which would be a plant growth regulator in order to help stimulate the growth of the plant. Then we have a second button that releases another consortium of bacteria that helps with nutrient availability that Todd can talk to in a little bit more detail. But then for 2025, we have this third button that will represent some future product concepts, such as a corn rootworm suppressing microbe that will help reduce the damage or the impact of corn rootworm on corn.
We actually tested that microbe this year, and it had very promising results.
Really?
Yes.
So give me an idea. Walk me through one application. Let's say you want to treat a seed box.
Yeah.
How would you go through it step by step here?
Yeah.
How would you do this?
Step by step. You're about to load the let's say center fill planter, and so you have your box. You have your tub of Tune-Up Plus corn. You take off each tab. You pop each one into the biocapsules into the tub itself. You shake it up real hard until it's thoroughly mixed, and at that point you can either, if it's a center fill, you can apply it through a talc graphite applicator, or you can actually use a scoop in order to add it in a little bit more in a metered fashion.
Oh, now we're watching it right on the screen here. Okay, so now, was this done on Future Farm, or is this on some demonstrator farms you've been working with?
Yeah, so this would have been done on Future Farm. So we had a replicated trial where this was done on a portion of the seed, but then the field just to the south, this was done across the entirety of the field in order to really maximize the genetic performance of that field. And if you think about each of these individual biocapsules, that's what's really neat about this whole system here is that the biocapsules, and I have one that's actually been taken out.
Oh, okay.
These biocapsules are sealed so that no air can get in, and it's the importance of delivering the live microbes that's really important to this whole concept. And so that's why we have this capsule here. It's filled with the bacteria. We have the button, but what the button actually does is you push it, and you can see on the bottom there's going to be this, more or less this tin foil that gets punctured by a blade that's within attached to the button itself, and then causing the either the Terrasym, the CRW microbe, or the consortium of bacteria to spill into the rest of the bucket.
We believe that why so many people have had inconsistent results with biologicals is because they're not actually delivering live microbes to the right place at the right time. And unless delivered properly, microbes die. And it's hard to keep them alive, and so we believe we have the best delivery mechanism in the business. It really works.
So what do you think the lifespan of a microbe is anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, do you dare to actually mix this up and run and grab a sandwich or something, eat a quick lunch, and then come back and pour it in the planter and go? Is that going to ruin everything?
That's not going to be a problem at all. You want to keep it as close to planting as possible, but really when you mix in these microbes within the bucket or within the pail, you have between 7 to 10 days in order to get that onto seed and planted. But once you apply it to the seed, you actually have just a little bit longer than that. Whereby the desiccation is going to occur at a little bit slower of a rate. And so, if you end up getting rained out, you have enough time to get back into the field and plant that seed that's already been treated with the Tune-Up Plus corn product.
How long have you been working with this?
This was our first full year with the product. We looked at some product concepts with it over the past 18 months or so, and have really gotten it out onto quite a few acres this last year.
We had this on about between 400,000 and 500,000 acres this last year. We expect to get it out over 2 million acres next year. And that's because it works. And we'll share some results. We've had excellent results with this product. And you know what? It's not just the biology. I think the zinc plays a major role in that. It really provides all the zinc you need, and because it's right on the seed. And so it's really a clever product that's extremely effective.
That's interesting. So is this handled through like your dealer network, or how do you
we sell
obtain
it through we sell it through our seed dealer network, and then we also have some distributors that are solely Streamline distributors selling these kinds of products. But most of it's sold through our seed dealership, yes, because it packages so well with seed. I mean, you think about it. We call Streamline seed-driven crop inputs for a reason, and it's because really when you're out in the planter dumping in your seed, you're putting in your Tune-Up Plus too at the same time, and maybe with that CRW microbe to help suppress your corn rootworm issues. So, you know, we just think the two work together beautifully and really work through a seed distribution system.
Seems like you're opening the door to maybe a lot more potential options on this in the future.
And the pail itself has a tremendous overall value, and it's not. So we're talking about establishing early strength, but it has a spike to harvest advantage, and it contributes to that. And when you think about the multiple components that are in that pail, you have three different nutrients, and one of the nutrients is chelated zinc. It's 1.35 pounds of chelated zinc. Well, do the math on that. 1.35 pounds to do it into a liquid form costs you about $31 an acre. So then we also have a system, a group of bacteria that help cleave and solubilize and make phosphorus more efficient during the growing season. It also has two nitrogen-fixing bacteria that will take dinitrogen out of the atmosphere into gas and can convert that into ammonia to then continue to feed that plant all season long. And then on the backside of that, it's also your talc and graphite need. So it's a great all-around product for dry planters that don't have the capability of being plumbed up and putting some of these products right down into the furrow.
Makes it sound like you're teaching the corn to think it's a soybean plant when you plant. Just the way that it'll fix nitrogen and that sort of thing.
We've always dreamed about that, Marlon.
Yeah.
Fixating nitrogen in corn has been a dream for years.
Yeah. Along with getting as many ears on a corn plant as you have soybean pods.
That's true.
Yeah. So what makes the biology in this Tune-Up Plus so different from the competitors up to this point then, do you think?
I think we've touched on that a number of times here, and I think it's the ability to deliver it alive. Mm-hmm. Again, when we think about biologicals, they're kind of the buzzword out there, and they also come with some negative buzzwords as well, right? And some of that skepticism, I think, is well-founded because the performance has been so inconsistent over the 10 to 15 years that we've been using and attempting to bring biological life into a cropping system. So we really think that the ability to deliver those sporulated, dormant bacteria becomes really important. Again, the sporulation, I'd like to give you the analogy. When I think about sporulating bacteria, they turn into a dormant spore, a hard spore, or an endospore. So we're in a seed business. So I liken it to hybrid seed corn. We harvest hybrid seed corn anywhere from 31 to 40% moisture, depending on where it is, depending on the conditions, depending on the genetic package.
Sure.
So we husk them. Then what's the next thing we do? We dry them down to 11.5%. Okay, so really now the embryonic axis is in a dormant state. And now when you deliver that back into the soil, you have seed-soil contact, no hairpinning, and you get good moisture, enough moisture to start the germination process, it blooms back to life. That's very similar to what sporulated bacteria are doing.
So Jim, how important is the seed coverage aspect of this?
Yeah.
I mean, is it critical to really get a good coating on that seed all the way around?
Well, yeah, I mean, in order for these microbes to work, in order for the zinc to have an impact on the seed, you really have to get good coverage on the seed. I mean, there's been research that has been done that has said that you really need at least 1,000 live microbes per seed in order to get the maximum impact of the microbe in terms of fixing nitrogen, making phosphorus available, and things like that. And so what we've measured within TuneUp Plus corn is by using this delivery mechanism, we beat our target of 1,000 live microbes per seed, not just by a little bit, but by about 30 to 40 times what we need. So instead of 1,000 live microbes, we measured somewhere between 38 and 40,000 microbes per seed. And that wasn't just at the very start of planting, but that went throughout the entire course of planting, from the very beginning of the field, and then as all that seed agitates and comes down through the planter, it lasted throughout the completion of the field that we measured in.
We actually contracted research where they counted the number of live microbes, and I can't imagine doing that. It would be that would be grueling work, counting 38,000 live microbes.
I would lose count, yeah.
I would lose count too.
Solution is the solution.
So, okay, now we have on the screen right now
Yeah.
something called planting progress that we're looking at, and explain how this is different with the TuneUp Plus system versus not using it.
Yeah, so what this infographic shows is it shows at the different points at which we measured microbes on the seed. And so, when the planter, as seed is working its way down into each individual row unit, you're getting shifting of seed, you're getting rubbing of seed against not just the planter itself, but other seeds. And so we wanted to make sure that we're not, having any sort of a falling off of these microbes, and that they're really adhering to the seed. So we measured at 20% planting of the field, 50% and 80% of the field being planted. And ultimately, that's where we came up with that 38 to 40,000 microbes per seed. And what really assisted it with that is the ionized zinc that helped with the adhesion to the seed itself because of the charges that attracted the zinc and anything connected to it to the seed itself.
Yeah, so what did you find out? How much you actually would lose that way? I remember planting soybeans in the past. You inoculate them, and when the box is empty, you just have a big pile of it in the bottom.
But we actually tested our TuneUp Plus pail for soybeans, which has rhizobia in it, and we saw a dramatic difference just in the number of nodules, and we put it side by side with pre-inoculated seed, and there were on most of the pre-inoculated seed there were very few nodules, and yet the TuneUp Plus soybean seed had massive amounts of nodules. And I think it just goes to show the message we've been saying all along, and that is it's really difficult to deliver live microbes in a manner like pre-treating seed with inoculant. There just aren't many of those left alive by the time they get into the soil. And with TuneUp Plus, you get massive amounts of live microbes along with the seed. And that's why we saw such a dramatic difference in nodulation.
I wonder, would it make a difference if you're planting on a humid day or not?
Well, you think it might, but really it shouldn't make too much of a difference, because remember that talc graphite is dry enough and it is hydrophobic enough that it's really keeping out a lot of that humidity. So you still get good adhesion to the seed.
You do, okay. So now, where do we go from here? You've got this tub that you just had out here. You're on, the second generation of it right now? You're talking about adding some stuff for 2025. But what do you see for opportunities now to add to that as you move forward? Where would you like to see it go?
Well, for sure. I mean, there's always opportunities for, iterative improvements, so that we've made improvements to the tub itself and the tub design in the last year, but also the contents of the tub, and then each of those different biocapsules where we can start to, as we've been evaluating new products on Future Farm, we continue to evaluate and try to introduce new products that would add value to our customers.
All righty.
Two of the biggest this year were we have a microbe for soybean cyst nematode on soybeans that we tested that looks quite interesting. And then the microbe for suppression of corn rootworm. Really good results.
Excellent. Well, we're going to head to a break, but when we come back, we'll learn more about TuneUp Plus and how it could make a major impact on your operations. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back to this Future Farm special. We're joined with Rob Robinson. He's the CEO, Jim Robinson, Chief Technology Officer, and Todd Clausen, Agronomy Manager. Thanks, guys, for being here with us. Appreciate that. Now, before we went to the break, we were discussing TuneUp Plus, and we touched a little on this before we went to the break. But Todd, what did you observe with TuneUp Plus, and what should a farmer expect throughout the season from it?
So I guess I would start at the beginning of the growing season. And when we were talking about a residue digest or residue release, we talked about the conditions that allows the crop to have better emergence and better stand establishment, better uniformity. Okay, so what this product can do is not mimic that, but it can induce greater emergence, greater establishment, and greater uniformity. And what we'll see out of this in location after location, we're averaging establishment for corn about 1,100 to 1,200 more plants per acre, treated versus untreated. Well, again, 1,000 plants per acre on 200 bushel corn is about 8 bushel per acre. Then we will also see structure, as you were showing there. We're getting greater structure. And this TuneUp Plus is not early season, it's not nutritional, it's about structure. So we want to build the factory, and we want to take care of the factory and get the factory to its ability to reproduce. So again, greater establishment, 1,100 to 1,200 more plants per acre in corn. We also have greater uniformity and emergence. When we were talking about the separation, it takes 5 days for your corn to emerge. We get more plants emerge on day one, 12 to 15% more on day one. So we're trying to meet that objective to a better rate of we want every plant to look like every other plant. And so that's just on corn itself, but we're getting greater structure below ground. We get greater leaf area above ground, and we walk out, and there are several ways to look at this. As these products come up, Jim mentioned it before, we see visible physical differences between treatments and untreatments. Sometimes you almost have to talk yourself into it, but we do on most examples see a physical separation between treated and untreated. So when we do that, we need to get our folks out there and look at the physical differences. Then number two, what we will do during the growing season is we'll take tissue samples and we will take soil samples to show the differences of the nutrient capability and the nutrient components that are in that tissue and also in the soil, and what that better structure can do for us. And then, at the end, the real fruition comes in what's the performance in yield. And so in corn, what we're seeing is almost 100 locations, almost 100 comparisons in 11 states with TuneUp Plus corn. We're seeing 8.6 bushel advantage, 8.6 bushel. In soybeans, we're seeing about 3.7 bushel advantage. And then think about corn as taken off and chopped for silage. In a number of locations, we're seeing 45 locations that we're getting 25% more dry weight. So more tonnage coming out of this product. And then in soybeans, we're getting more nodulation in soybeans. We're getting better tap root development. And then coming off your tap roots, you get the secondary and tertiary root hairs that also give rise, and you now have space on the root system for more nodules. Well, and so the structure is coming from the stimulation of the auxin effect. So I get a better root system, and then you get more nodulation from the bradyrhizobia that we're able to deliver more alive into the soil.
Well, Todd, if we could, I wanted to have the producer and the directors bring up that root mass picture that we had of the two corn plants beside each other. Anyway, they had the two root masses, and it was very obvious on the screen that our viewers at home could tell. There it is. The plant on the left has a much larger root mass than the plant on the right. Now, what is it about that makes it so much larger? Can you explain that in a little more detail about that? Why is that one so different?
I think it starts really early in the season. So as you drop seed in the soil, like I say, to keep the performance capability of the crop, you leave it in the bag. So everything we do to it is a stress. So we drop it in the soil, it's cool, it's wet, the conditions are pretty bumpy for it. And so the stimulation and the building of that structure happens so much earlier. So you get a better, out of corn, you get a better radicle, you get a better seminal root system that comes, the three little seminal roots that come out of that radicle, and then you will instigate and initiate your crown or your nodal root formation so much earlier. So it's got a head start. And so with that head start, then what can it do? Because your nutrients are taken up in just a couple of forms. You have mass flow into the root system, but for the most part, it's root interception. So the roots have to go out and they have to seek off of the soil colloids, off the soil particles, and with the root tips, they're able to absorb those nutrients and take those nutrients up. Well, you've got a bigger structure, you've got more root mass, you've got more architecture below ground. I've got more area to harvest nutrient. And all of those things combined build a better factory.
So that picture that they showed, it's the same hybrid.
Yes.
The only difference, side by side in the same field, the only difference, one is treated with tune-up plus corn, the other is not. A couple other factors. Number one, this is the 5X return I talked about. If you put a pencil to it, the figures that Todd shared can produce a 5X return, both in the corn pail and the soybean pail. But the corn pail can be used for corn, for sorghum, and for wheat. It works equally in all three crops. We also have pails that work for cotton, for dry beans, and so we have kind of a broad set of products with Tune-Up Plus.
And if you think a little bit about, just that difference in root mass, you're getting that return on investment because the plant can now access more nutrients, and it's be able to build a bigger factory because the factory starts out a little bit bigger too. Like Todd said, it can access more nutrients from the get-go, so it can then proliferate more to access even more nutrients and water. And that's where you eventually end up building that factory enough to generate that return on investment.
I'm just curious, how many days would it take that plant on the right to grow as big to get that root mass to equal the one on the left?
Oh, and that can be, at that time of year, that could be 6, 7, 8 days.
Yeah.
Depending on your GDU accumulation. But it also allows you to plant, maybe a fuller season type of hybrid and take advantage of a longer grain field period if you can stimulate that growth, if you can get them up evenly, and maybe even not push your conditions, but even on the calendar, you look out. Conditions are fabulous, and we talked about it's all about conditions when you plant corn. But it's going to be a little cool out there. What should I do? Well, one, you make sure you plant deep enough, but number two, you can protect and you can stimulate, you can support that seedling and germinating plant by using a product like this.
But you were saying that the first day of emergence, what is it? You see like a 12% increase? Is that right?
So when we talk about day emergence, we talk about, again, it takes about 5 days for all of your seed plants, all your corn plants to come out of the ground. From the time the first one emerges till you've exhausted all of the emergence. And so you think about those 5 days. Well, from day one to day three, that's about 100 kernels on an ear that puts on 650 kernels. Out to day 4, it's about 250 kernels as a penalty. And you get out here past to day 6, those plants will now go barren.
So when you look at that screen there, I know it may be a little bit small for our viewers at home to really decipher that. But what are you showing on the right-hand end there where you have the red lines on that graphic?
So the top set of ears is the treated example. And you look at the black arrow from the left to the right, those are the number of ears in that specific distance of row that came up on day 1. Then you see the numeral 2 up above. There were 3 ears that came out of the ground 2 days later. There were 2 ears that came out of the ground 3 days later, and 2 small ears that came out of the ground 4 days later. Now, conversely, look at the untreated. It had 5 or 6 fewer ears or fewer plants come up on day 1. And then you see that as you graduate out, you get smaller and smaller ears, and again, the penalty for not having every plant look like every other plant can be significant. The theory, if you do a yield calculation on this particular example, is 18 bushel per acre to the treated example.
Really?
Yeah.
Times how many dollars a bushel now? I mean, that pays back pretty well.
Pays back really well.
And that all goes back to you. What'd you say, 5-to-1 return, something like that?
Yes, 5X return.
So, Rob, let me ask you this. Of course, most farmers are in the habit of using starter fertilizer now. How does that factor in to using products like this? Are you making innovations in that regard to use starter fertilizer now?
Well, I mean, we think number one, Tune-Up Plus has a lot of strengths, and it can be used in conjunction with starter fertilizer and still provide significant benefits. So, I mean, I see that I see them as being complementary. We also have a new product that we tried for the first time on Future Farm this year. That is a starter fertilizer, and it's actually a replacement for starter, a substitute that is water soluble. So I think that is the second item that we're looking at that I think has relevance to starter fertilizer.
Have you done research on how this works with different types of starter fertilizers in the spring, like liquid or dry or what have you?
The research done in the past has been this particular, it's called Convert that we have, that it's been used in the vegetable industry for 6 or 7 years.
Oh.
So it has a lot of science behind it. You can fundamentally blend it with anything. I think it can be a full replacement for, say, 1034O, or you can use it as a partial replacement. You can have your choice. It's water soluble. It's low in salt index. It has a salt index of 4, and typically is less expensive than 1034O.
You know, if you think about it a little bit, using a dry starter fertilizer, one of the biggest expenses that comes out in fertilizer is going to be actually hauling it. So the logistics behind the fertilizer itself. And so if you're starting with the dry fertilizer, you're not hauling water out to disperse into the countryside. You're actually just hauling the dry fertilizer itself. And so that's what makes it a really innovative product, in that because it mixes so easily on farm, you don't have to do anything special to mix it. It has the low salt index, and so therefore it would be non-corrosive to equipment. And that lack of need to ship water means that the cost position can be in a much better place. That's what makes it so exciting.
I see Rob has something over here. Either the bar is open or you're going to do a demonstration.
We're
So
going
what
to
do we
do a
got going on
demonstration
here?
of mixing Convert in water. And it's really simple. It just takes
It
a couple of
is.
minutes to dissolve.
Okay.
I'm just going to put this as in the same proportion. We recommend, if you're using, say, 5 gallons of 1034O, we recommend 5 gallons of Convert, and it's a half a pound of Convert per gallon of water. So the proportion we're doing here is the same proportion as that. And I just thought it might be interesting to show people how quickly and easily it dissolves, and it's very quick.
It's already done.
Just a few minutes. It's almost done now. It'll just be a couple minutes more, and it'll all be dissolved. And so very simple to work with. It's non-caustic. If you've ever dipped your fingers in 1034O, it's sticky.
Yeah.
This is just like water.
Fascinating.
Don't drink it. I don't think it's probably good to drink.
So it doesn't settle out.
It does not settle out. In fact, this is one that's been dissolved now for a few months. And there is nothing in this whatsoever, no particulates, nothing that's settled out of this concoction over the last few months. It just stays suspended
That's
for an
crazy.
indefinite period of time.
So what is in Convert? Do you dare
Well,
to, do you
I
dare
tell
to
you what,
mention?
I'll let one of these guys talk about it.
Oh, yeah, I can start out. So
Okay.
Convert is, it's a dry starter fertilizer that really has something that's a lot of fun to talk about. That would be ether technology. And so it's not just the fertilizer itself that's in there, but it's a set of enzymes. So there's a phosphatase, which makes more available phosphate in the soil through breaking down organic soil phosphates. And then there's also a mannanase enzyme. And so mannanase is an enzyme that will cleave mannose types of sugars, which are what we find that surround the root hairs of the actual plants. And so you want to have some level of those sugars surrounding the root hairs because it acts as a buffer. But also you want to be able to have nutrients be able to filter through that sugar coating in order to get into the root itself. And so if you use mannanase within Convert, that allows for nutrients to more easily enter into the root hairs, get into the plant, and will increase overall nutrient uptake within the plant.
This is crazy. Todd, how does this compare to a traditional fertilizer then?
So as we look at this, our direct approach is let's initially replace, say, 5 gallons of 1034O. Okay, and so what we want to do early in the season, if you're running solution into the furrow, you want that early phosphorus out there for a reason, because phosphorus is the transport mechanism. The phosphorus transports energy through the plant. and you're out there early, you have a very small plant, and that plant doesn't have the ability to capture a whole lot of sunlight. It doesn't have a whole lot of water because it doesn't have a whole lot of root system. And so it's a low sugar accumulating time of year. And so you really need that phosphorus to be able to transport that sugar throughout the plant and move it where we need to move it. And so what we're looking for early in the season is to have about 1.5 pounds of phosphorus that's available in an available form into that furrow. And if we're going to compare and contrast it with the 1034-0, both of these comparisons are looking at is almost 1.5 pounds. The convert will give us 1.45 pounds of orthophosphorus, which would be H2PO4. And then that 5 gallons of 1034-0 will give us about 1.38 pounds. So they're statistically the same, but it will and can deliver that in much more user-friendly form, non-corrosive, non-sticky, and you also don't have to carry the weight. We deliver this material in 50-pound bags or in 2,000-pound totes. And so a tote, farmers will understand this. A tote's, the size of a seed sack, a big seed super sack, or the size of basically a black box of seed. And so that will cover 800 acres. And so there you have that sitting in the corner of your shop. Well, to have enough material, 1034-0, to cover 800 acres, you need a 4,000-gallon tank. So the efficiency factor there is very important. And well, it's a finely milled phosphorus source, completely ortho, and we're just we think it has a specific gravity, basically of water. Water is 8.53 pounds per gallon, and when you add this product, all of the examples that we've had analyzed today either run 8.55 or 8.56. So the viscosity is basically water. So it flows extremely well and very, very simple to use on the farm.
The 1034-0, I used to ridge plant, and I had a planter shoe that it would put it right under the seed, and then a press wheel would push the seed almost down into it. But you couldn't use very much of it, or you would burn the seed.
Particularly,
there was toxicity to it.
And particularly in dry conditions, because when you think about it, so there's a salt index to all of these fertilizer compounds, and the salt index of 1034-0 is just over 20. The salt index of this product happens to be 4, so it's 20% the salt index. And you just mentioned the term burn. Salt doesn't really burn, but as that seed, the first component, the first structure that comes out of your corn seed will be the radical down at a 45-degree angle, and that's about 90% water. And so if you have a high salt load, now you're in dry conditions, that salt has an affinity for water and it will desiccate that root system. And so hence we always call it burn. But this product only has 20% of the salt load of 1034-0, and then consider a higher quality type of a phosphorus delivery system in something like a 624-6, a 100% ortho, low salt. This product in convert is still about 40% of the salt load of a real high quality type of a synthetic fertilizer.
Rob, I keep thinking back to my old farming days, and do you know how much equipment I had to replace on a kind of starter fertilizer, just making everything corrode?
I know it. It's very corrosive. It's not fun to handle. It's difficult to handle.
Yeah.
And we just think this is revolutionary. This convert, if you see, it's all this one that I poured in is completely dissolved now. There's nothing left in it. It's completely completely ready to go.
What about the hardness of the water? Does that matter?
Doesn't seem to matter. No.
Really?
It takes a little bit longer. Very low temperature water. Takes a little longer to dissolve, but I'm not talking hours. It's just a few minutes more. So this is really a simple product. It's effective, safe to use, easy to use. It's like I said, I think to me it's revolutionary.
And comes in at a lower cost than a 1034-0, a 624-6, a 918-9.
Yep.
We've also all plugged filters and screens if solution comes out of solution and precipitates, and that's where that solubility really seems to matter. Is because if you get held up with planting and you're sitting there with the full load of starter, you do not want it to sit for too long. Otherwise, you'll end up just having to replace lines or filters, and so that's where that solubility really tends
and
to
we
matter.
used to mix stuff in with the starter, and that's when it would really cake up and settle out, and you had a real nightmare on your hands. So how do you market this?
Well, again, we market it through our seed dealers, and they're talking to folks now. This is, we've used some last year to get an introduction to it. It worked extremely well, and so this is the big year we're rolling it out. And so all of our dealers and distributors are talking about Convert now with their customers and with anyone who's interested in it. So that's we're rolling it out through our seed distribution channel.
I just had a weird thought of planting season without starter fertilizer tanks rolling all over the place.
I think a lot of people would be very happy if that were the case. Really happy.
That's kind of mind-bending thinking about that. All right, so we'll go to another break at this point, but we will have more with the folks from Rob Seco right after this. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to this Future Farm special. The next portion of Future Farm focused on optimizing genetic potential and the results that we observed on the farm.
This is one of those opportunities to preempt that. So build the defense mechanism in the plant, trigger that defense mechanism without having the actual stress on it to help get ahead of that potential stress and the negative effect that stress will have.
Exactly. So, I mean, these plants, they're factories. They only have a finite set of resources. Yeah. And so, either augmenting or implementing some defense mechanisms earlier in the plant will allow it to reallocate those resources to better withstand some of that stress.
Yeah.
Let's turn to Todd then. He was featured in that little video there. So you looked at early season and late season nutritionals on Future Farm. So what's the importance of nutrition early in a plant's life?
When we think about the big nutrients, we often consider nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They're the big three, right? And early in the season, we want to turn our heads in just a little bit different direction. But number one, I want to think about sulfur. And sulfur is likely the fourth primary nutrient that's out there, NPK, sulfur. And sulfur becomes so important early in the season. It is really linked to nitrogen. And when we think about that, sulfur is able to take nitrate, which is the most absorbed form of nitrogen, into the corn plant, and it's able to assimilate and break that down into the nitrogen molecule and O2. Well, then nitrogen in and of itself becomes part of amino acids that now are fulfilling and building proteins. Well, proteins are the total structural component of everything physical on that plant. So we've talked about structure, we've talked about the root architecture, we've talked about leaf area index and things like that. So sulfur, it really instigates that early nitrogen link, and it not only is part of chlorophyll, but does help link nitrogen to amino acids, to protein, to structure, to architecture of the plant. And then secondly, we would consider zinc being terribly important early in the season. And zinc will do several things. Zinc, number one, is a chlorophyll component. But zinc also has the capability of helping divide cells and elongate cells. And why that's so important early is because you've got such a small plant in cool conditions, in rough and tumble weather patterns, cool, wet, and sometimes overcast. So it's really a slow pattern of growth, biologically speaking. And so you have slow photosynthesis, you have slow sugar accumulation. So if you can stimulate a bigger architecture and bigger structure, I think both sulfur and zinc play a part in doing those things.
All right, so I'll stay with you on this. So what are some of the innovations that you came up with on the Future Farm to provide, let's say, early success in the crop and protection in case you have adverse conditions out there affecting that crop?
So we've talked about Tune-Up Plus for corn and for soybeans as an example, which comes with the chelated zinc. And so we're able to get that zinc component that's in there and working and taking that structural component and building that factory. So as we move into that middle 20 days, whereby now you really have to think about nitrogen in that middle 20 days, because that middle 20 days is V10 up through about tassel time. And this plant is an extreme growth period, and you're starting to just get on the precipice of the dog days of summer. So we can get very adverse weather patterns. We're starting to get around the 4th, the 5th, the 6th of July into those heat days of July and high sunlight, long days. And to help mitigate some of those stresses, we're using a product that we call NutriBoost Defense. It does have an N, P, and K value to it, but there's two other components that are in this NutriBoost Defense, as you can see on the screen here, and those two novel components are enzymes. And enzymes aren't live, as we've spoken before, but they instigate and they catalyze other parts of the progress and process in the plant. And so the two enzymes here, one happens to be tryptophan, and tryptophan, I know when you hear that word, you think about turkey dinner on
Right, yeah.
Thanksgiving, right? And,
Yeah.
and so you need to take a nap because of the tryptophan. But what tryptophan will do is it instigates a natural hormone known as indole acetic acid. And so here you are in a really tough growing condition. It's 97 degrees and you're short on water. There's not a lot of growth continuing to process through those 140 days of life. And so tryptophan induces indole acetic acid that helps continue, even in tough conditions, cell division and cell elongation. And then so the second enzyme that is in NutriBoost Defense happens to be arginine. And arginine builds polyamines. And I hate to use, I'm not trying to use big words, but what polyamines will do is they will trigger molecular and physiological stress tolerance. So it kicks on a defense mechanism, kicks on that defense mechanism before the stresses really start having an effect on the plant. And if it kicks on that defense mechanism, then those stresses that affect that plant, it takes less energy to recover from those stressors.
So when do you apply it and how do you apply it?
And so these are foliar. So we're applying them as a liquid, a foliar, right to the growing crop. And in this particular product, NutriBoost Defense, we're going to run it out there at V8 to V10, right in front of that immense growth period that happens to corn. And in that immense growth period, again, V10 is, on us just above waist high until it gets into tassel time period, because it'll put on a node, it'll put on a new leaf about every 2.5 days. So it's really clicking along. And if we can, one, induce a stress mechanism, kick on and trigger a bigger, broader, more robust plant, it can help mitigate those stresses that we often see in the month of July in a corn crop and a soybean crop for that matter.
So that's, Rob, that's the stage where we used to say you can hear the corn grow at night, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
You still can if you listen closely enough.
I mean, it grows like several inches a day. So when it's really, really hot and it doesn't get below 85 degrees at night, that's a problem for the corn plant. It can't really rest, as they say, right? And would that help with stuff like that, or is that some stuff you've been working on?
Well, I mean, if you think about what the plant is undergoing during that time, when you apply in that V8 to V10 time frame, all the way up through tassel, the corn plant is really determining what its maximum yield potential is going to be, because it's setting the number of rows around and then number of rows long.
Yeah.
And as we get later into the season, if you've it basically caused the defense mechanisms to turn on in the plant, and so it's ready for any sort of stress that may come through, it could still put on that maximum yield potential. And then as we get into flowering, that's another really, really sensitive time for the plant, because the plant's got to push those silks all the way up through that silk channel to get out in order to pollinate. And those silks are 90-something% water. And so under stress, if that plant doesn't have enough of a root system and a defense mechanism to withstand the stress, then it's not going to be able to pollinate properly. That's really why you want to have that plant ready to go, reinforced for any stress that may come during those critical periods.
Did you come up with any innovations on the Future Farm then to help mitigate some of that late season type stuff?
Yeah, and NutriBoost Defense does a really good job of pre-prepping the plant for those stressors. And then what we look to in order to continue protecting that yield potential that you help create with the NutriBoost Defense types of product, we have a product that we call NutriBoost NKB, and that would be a foliar nutritional again. But this one's more of a true foliar nutritional in the sense that it contains nitrogen, potassium, and boron. And so boron's going to be important for the plant because it's going to help continue to maintain the plant health, the chlorophyll, the activity of the chlorophyll, and the overall chloroplast energy generation that then goes into feeding that plant. But what's really special about NutriBoost NKB isn't necessarily the contents in terms of the fertility that's in the jug itself. It's actually more of how it gets delivered into the plant and where it works in the plant. Because, I mean, how often do you talk to farmers who maybe apply a foliar or nutritional, but they don't necessarily see an impact? And if you were to actually cut some leaf tissue out and measure prior to and shortly after applying foliar nutritionals, those nutritionals get caught in the leaf and they don't necessarily make their way elsewhere within the plant. And so the special innovations behind NutriBoost NKB are actually in the delivery mechanism, both through the surfactant that's used within the jug and then also the form of fertility that's in the jug itself. And so think about a plant like you do a human. So you have different vasculature, kind of like what's being shown here on the screen itself. Vasculature in humans would be your veins that blood flows through. And in plants, it's going to be the xylem that takes nutrients and water up from the ground and out through the leaves. And then the phloem that takes the organic compounds like sugars from the leaves and into the sink of the plant. So that would be, think places like the ear or the tassel, depending on the time of year. And so if we can get these nutritionals from the leaves through the leaf cuticle and into the xylem and phloem, we can then cause translocation and penetration throughout the plant in order to get those nutritionals to where they need to be in order to establish and really protect and enhance yields late in the season.
I would think timing would be critical on that, wouldn't it?
Timing is absolutely critical. I mean, nitrogen is typically, going to be the biggest nutritional that's used. That's the fertilizer that we spend the most money on, and most of it's taken up earlier in the season, but it's not always still there when we really need it. And so the timing on NutriBoost NKB would be any time from that tassel time onward would be the maximum utility, because in that time period, what are you typically doing when you apply other products onto the plant? It could be a fungicide because tar spot's coming in, or it could be an insecticide in order to control beetle pressure. But why not add in NutriBoost NKB that would be compatible with those products, and then maximize your yield potential and maybe get that last little bit of yield when the plant is already starting to run short on nitrogen sources in the soil?
I actually had something a couple of times when I was farming that it got so hot that, and it was right when it was tasseling, and it scalded the silks, and I had what I call a striped ear. I don't know if you've run across that, but you had a barren side of the ear.
Zipper ear.
Yeah. But I don't know if anything would prevent that or not, or would this help the plant maybe tolerate that a little bit better?
I think these two products that we've just discussed help in two different ways. You build a defense mechanism prior to the stress having an effect on the plant. So you've got a stronger, bigger, more bold plant. Okay? And so you're able to continue to move forward even in those stressful conditions before the stress factor then hits. And then secondly, there's always been theoretical value around applying foliar nutrients when plants really need them. But if they can't get where they need to go, as Jim was just mentioning, because it gets caught up in the leaf between the epidermis and the endodermis and a lot of people have used foliar nutrient products and they've been very skeptical of them. And I think about some of the research that we've done. You apply a foliar nutrient, let's say it's boron, and you take a tissue sample of that plant and it is deficient in boron. Well, then we run out there with a boron type of product, a chelated boron, we make that application, and you know what, 3 weeks later you take another tissue sample and guess what it says? That the boron level has gone up. But where is it? It's still in the leaf tissue and it's not getting to the sink where it really needs to go. And so we've made and seen a lot of research in that way, that we're applying the foliar nutrient applications. The tissue samples show that the levels have gone up, but it doesn't come to fruition in performance or yield because it's still not getting where it needs to go.
Interesting stuff.
Well, and that's a secret in NutriBoost. I mean, they're formulated in a way that they go actually where they're needed in that plant at that time, whether it's the tassel or the ear, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, not only do you have the environmental stress, but you're going to have insect stress too on the plant late in the season. And I imagine that would probably maybe help the plant tolerate that a little bit, wouldn't it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, as we think about NutriBoost Defense, as an insect comes in either corn rootworm chewing on the roots and causing immune responses, or actually entries into the plant for Fusarium and other sort of fungal pathogens.
Oh, good point.
Or if you get more of the corn borer style of insects that can cause, if it's not a traded product, that can cause different immune responses. You really want to have those plants preemptively prepared for those stressors, whether it's through overall plant size or just the native immune response already active to fight off those pathogens earlier in their infection life cycle than you do later. So that's always a good thing.
Now, you mentioned something that caught my attention here a little bit ago, and we've done several reports on it on RFD TV. The fact that there's tar spot around. And I just wondered how prevalent that was this year. Is that still spreading?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing tar spot continuing to make its march from the east into the west. So we have reports in essentially every state from Pennsylvania moving our way west into the eastern portions of South Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. And it continues to make its way west. I don't know if we have official confirmation from central and western Nebraska, but we have heard several reports of observations that look an awful lot like tar spot.
So the products that both of you mentioned, Todd and Jim, do either or both of those help to combat that?
Not directly. So they wouldn't have a fungicidal effect upon them. So they wouldn't directly have an effect on that fungal pathogen, but creating a healthier plant, it's able to mitigate some of its stresses, though it likely wouldn't, if the conditions are right for that pathogen, it likely wouldn't slow or hinder the progress or the reproduction of that pathogen in that field. And some of these areas, and it has been marching north and it's marching west. And we saw it late enough this year that it didn't have a real negative effect on the corn crop itself. But the effect that it does have, it's now in there as part of the disease triangle. The disease triangle, you have to have the host. Well, we're going to plant corn, then the environment has to be conducive for that disease. Well, you know what? Now we've got the pathogen. So it's going to have to be on our radar as we continue to move forward. And both of these products that we just talked about, NutriBoost Defense and NKB, they're both great tank mix components with fungicidal products.
Well, Jim, now that we're coming down the home stretch of harvest and it's in the rearview mirror here, all the innovations you guys have worked on and applied and used on Future Farm, now that you look back on it, what did you take away from this growing season here?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of really fun products to work with. I mean, the Future Farm itself, we tested a lot of different products. We had a lot of different experimental products out with customers, with dealers to do side-by-sides, figure out what works and what doesn't. And so what I really loved about what we've learned on Future Farm is the importance of delivering the live biology to the seed or to the field in order to actually get the results that we expect to get from that biology. Because if it's not alive, it's not going to do anything. I mean, this can result in increased root growth, increased biomass, better emergence, and overall just suppression of crop stress and increased yields. That's been my favorite thing to see on the Future Farm.
Well, Rob, I know you were involved with it, and I would imagine from your point of view, in a way, it was probably a lot of fun, but I'm sure you learned a lot by going out there and just digging in and getting your hands dirty and seeing what you could find out about the crop.
Well, we did learn a lot, and I think it was rewarding. It's new, it's different, it's interesting. We still have a lot more to learn about this, but we shared the results. I mean, on Tuna Plus corn, 8.6 bushels improvement in yield. Soybeans, 3.7 more bushels. On silage, we saw a 25% improvement in dry matter content using Tuna Plus corn. And not only that, but we saw an improvement in quality. 73% of the qualitative factors we measured were improved by the use of Tuna Plus corn on silage. And so really fascinating results that some of which we didn't expect. It was surprising.
Would you agree with that too, from your perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the results have been just, surprising in the consistency and magnitude. I mean, it's been a lot of fun to watch those results roll.
We're getting 88% win rate And I can tell you, if I had a hybrid that won 65 to 70% of the time, it would probably be an industry-leading hybrid.
Yes.
And so to have a product that wins that often, that shows an advantage that often, is truly unusual.
I know it'd be a difficult question off the top of your head. Do you know how many replications you had out there?
Yeah, on the Tuna Plus corn, we had 90 side-by-sides so far, and we have more than that now. That's just the accumulation to date.
Okay.
So we have, and that's across 11 states. So it wasn't like it was just a few places. We saw it first on the Future Farm before all the results started coming in from other locations. But we saw it across 11 states. On the silage, we saw it in 45 side-by-sides across 5 states. And on soybeans, I think it's 26 or 27 side-by-sides where we're getting the 3.7 bushels. And I don't recall the number of states, but it's multiple states with that product as well. We're seeing better stands with residue release and getting, some of the benefits of that as well in terms of improved stands, improved uniformity, and improved yield.
Todd, I'm sure this was like having a giant playground for you. I mean, to experiment around and see what you could discover and come up with.
The photo that you see of the pattern of this, we're in it when I'm in the Elkhorn area. We're in it every day, and it's just it really is pretty awesome. And I'm a farmer, so I'm really a caretaker, and the opportunity to supplement the needs and support the needs of that crop on a daily basis is terribly important to the overall performance of that crop. And the ability to stimulate it and keep it progressing through its 140 days of life, particularly in those tough periods early in the season when it's cool and overcast and not moving very rapidly to those dog days to whereby plants want to shut down because it's too hot. And then overall, like I said, I'm a caretaker, and it's really exciting to be able to protect what's out there. And when you think about some of these products, when you think about investing in your crop, a lot of folks want to invest in their crop when it just doesn't look very good, right? When there's a deficiency symptom, that's when they want to go out there. And what I've learned over time, and what we can see with some of these products on our Future Farm in Elkhorn, Nebraska, is the time to invest in your crop is when it can't look any better, because you've got that foundation out there. So you open up the door to the fire, and you keep throwing coal into it, and you get it to the very last day of life you can get out of it. And because then you continue to get, especially in corn, you get depth of kernel, which creates so much more yield than you can ever imagine. You've already got the kernel count, so let's get it home. And I just think from cradle to grave, this combination of genetics and seed-driven crop inputs is just, I think it's novel, and I'm really pleased to be having the opportunity to be a part of it.
It's got to be fun riding in the combine when you're going through harvest and watching that yield monitor.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, when you see the number 3 up there all the time, it's just, and so, but then we sit back and we talk about it all the time. So now where do we go? Now what do we do?
Well, Rob, that'll bring me to you. How did it relate to your expectations? Did it match them? Did it exceed them?
No, actually, I think it exceeded my expectations.
Really?
I'm going to have to admit, I was a biological denier. 3-4 years ago, I wasn't a great believer in biologicals, but once we got into this and I've seen the results of it, I'm a strong believer, 100%. I think they have a place in the production system. They can provide a great benefit and provide a great return on investment. And so they've exceeded my expectations, Marlon.
And I would imagine that you probably came away with not only gratitude from all the research you were able to do, but I bet you also came away with a lot of questions for next year, too.
Well, I mean, we're looking into the future, the future. And what is the future of Future Farm? Well, I think it has a bright future. I spent some time with a brilliant scientist who was responsible for the advent of traits and biotechnology and a real forward thinker. And he told me something I've always remembered. He told me that the best place to find innovation is the confluence, the crossroads between two scientific disciplines. And so if you look at plant genetics as one discipline, and you look at biologicals as another discipline, I think where the opportunity we have is to investigate where those two cross each other and learn innovations. How can we use genetics and biologicals together with soils and production systems to improve yield, improve efficiency, improve quality? I mean, I think that's what we intend to do in the future. And I think in addition to that, bring in new and different kinds of sciences that are just emerging and try them out as well. Not just strictly around biologicals and seed genetics, but I think there's lots of new and interesting things being done in agriculture that we need to explore.
I like to think of that term synergy.
Yes.
Everybody's pulling on the same yoke.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're going to have to take a break right here, but we'll have more with the folks from Rob Seco right after this. Come on back. Well, welcome back once again to this Future Farm special. All night we've been catching up with Rob Seco. We've been talking with Jim and Todd and Rob about what's been going on Future Farm this year. And I want to turn now to Jim, right to my right here. Now, we've seen some innovations on the farm to maximize the performance of seed. You've worked a lot with the seed. Now, how has the innovations that you have worked with, how has that interacted with changing the way you look at your seed selection now? Are you thinking about it differently?
You know, this opens up a lot of possibilities for farmers with seed. You know, if you look at each of these different solutions offered through the Streamline Ag portfolio, whether it's Tune-Up Plus or Residue Release, combining those two particular products together, for example, in a farmer's operation, can really allow that farmer to plant a much fuller season hybrid than they typically would, because they can get into the field earlier in the season in order to get a better pop-up from the seed earlier, so they can plant earlier, take advantage of a full season hybrid. And full season hybrids really, have a lot more yield potential because they just have so much more GDUs to work with, so many more kernel rows to put around, a longer grain fill period because they're able to take advantage of that full season. And as we think also, the Tune-Up Plus, Residue Release, they really enable that full season product to maximize its genetic potential through the nutrient release and the better seed to soil contact. Now, secondly, I also think that we can really improve the top end yield potential and protect it through products like NutriBoost NKB and NutriBoost Defense of these already really high yielding germplasm hybrids that we have out there today. I mean, we've seen higher yields than we've ever seen before, but we really need to make sure that we're maximizing those yields and protecting them with products like NutriBoost NKB and NutriBoost Defense. And then third, silage is such a huge deal within the United States and actually internationally too. Sure. And the biggest problem that silage choppers have is they don't always have the ability to get to the field to chop at the right moisture. I mean, ideally, you're going to chop silage at that 65 to 68% moisture. And I mean, Todd, how often do we hear a silage chopper come in and say,
"Oh, absolutely." I mean, Marlon, you're from Kansas, and so there's a lot of chopping that goes on down there.
Yep.
And every time the guy goes to the field and they start building their pile and filling their pit, they come out and they go, "How did it get so dry?" And so these opportunities, two things that we've mentioned was, one, a later maturity, fuller season hybrid is so important to get to that point. And then also if we can keep it more healthy, if we can instigate its defensive capability, particularly later in the season where it holds its health, that's where 25% more dry weight comes from in silage. And when you think about maturity, we need to plant the fullest season hybrids in our environment that we possibly can. And reason being is because every day of relative maturity is worth about 2.7 bushel per acre per day. So between a 100 day and a 110 day, there's theoretically 27 bushel less. But there's a lot of folks that are in a 105 to 110 day window that they plant 103, 4, and 5 when they should be planting 109, 10, 11. And some of these innovations may allow us to get them to turn the corner to simply become more profitable on their farm, because with that later season maturity, the longer the grain fill period, the more grain I can fill.
And that takes me back to that earlier graphic we had in the show for our viewers that were with us back then about the two corn plants side by side and the root masses. You have
Exactly.
the one with a really big root mass, and you had the one that was really lacking, and you know that one's going to run out of gas much sooner.
It's already
And
it's
it
already a
proves
week
your
ahead.
point.
It's already a week ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So it's going to run out of gas and not yield nearly as much.
Yeah.
So talk about the new generation of seeds that are out there and the germplasm that's available to draw from, and some of the new innovations that are coming to the forefront nowadays.
Well, yeah, I mean, we think a lot about, well, for the last more than 100 years, the germplasm improvements that have been made. Back in the 1860s, everything was, landrace lines that were just saved back, and people selected the best, what they thought were the best years. But over the last number of decades, we've seen consistent, and actually ever since back when I was born, we were still using a fair number of public lines generated by universities. But with the privatization of breeding, we've seen an acceleration of genetic potential, because private organizations were able to patent and generate intellectual property from germplasm. Now, what's really fun now is that we've seen all those decades of genetic improvement, and we're going to continue to see those. But the data collection possibilities that we have today, both for farmers on their full fields. So, we worked with Klaas in order to look at what kind of data collection we could get and how we can use that to make better decisions on the farm. But we also see that on the research and development side of the industry as well. So better data collection means that we have more success, or more consistent success, with new products coming to the marketplace, because every year of testing and trialing and development of new hybrids, we have better data, so we have a lower false positive rate. So everybody's seen the brand new hot hybrid that everybody's excited about. You plant it on your own farm, and the hybrid's just a dud out of the gates. It's not as exciting as you thought it was going to be. That 6-year-old hybrid beat it by 20 bushels an acre. With the new, better data collection techniques, we can really minimize the probability of that happening.
So do you foresee some new traits that will come out then based on the research you've been able to do that we haven't been looking at so far?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of new transgenic traits that are in the pipeline coming to the market today. I mean, at first, we're going to start to see more and more stacking of herbicide-tolerant traits together. We've relied on glyphosate for the last 25 years now, starting with beans and then the integration into corn, and now it's across more than 90% of the acres in the United States for corn and beans. And we've become so reliant that it's caused problems with glyphosate-resistant weeds. Well, now we're seeing the stacking of additional herbicide-tolerant traits that allow us to use better, well, not just better, but different herbicides in order to control those glyphosate-resistant weeds. That's going to be one set of innovations that we'll see on the seed trait technologies coming forward. But then we're also going to see the introduction of new and additional modes of action for insect resistance traits. And so that could be additional modes of action for corn rootworm traits. We've seen a couple introduced in the last couple of years into the industry, and we'll continue to see a few more in the probably late decade and into the 2030s that'll be novel new traits, because let's face it, corn rootworm is a dynamic pest that has figured out a way around every single one of our integrated pest management strategies that we have. And so integrating in these new modes of action with maybe something like the corn rootworm biological to help suppress the damage caused by these pests will really allow us to keep that tool belt full and not run into resistance issues. So that's what we see on the trait forefront in corn and soybeans in particular.
Is it possible to come up with something that's tar spot resistant?
Oh, there is genetic resistance to tar spot, and finding the genes associated with that genetic resistance is going to be the first step. And that is something that's going to be really fun to integrate into overall genetic improvements of North American germplasm.
We do have some hybrids that are better under tar spot than others. So we do see differences, a range of differences. And so we can make recommendations that help people out, but obviously fungicide is has been the most effective control.
And a lot of that natural tolerance or resistance to tar spot or other diseases has a lot to do with health and stay green. And for all the things that we've just talked about, supporting and stimulating and protecting, we're creating a more robust plant that also lends and contributes to that tolerance or that resistance.
So, Jim, what's happening with genetic improvement these days, and maybe some of the breeding methods out there that you're involved with? How do you do it differently than what you used to?
Yeah, there's a lot of new technology in breeding, but there's also a lot of new data analytics that can be incorporated into breeding. So we've seen the advent of precision breeding coming into the industry a number of years ago through looking at the different genes that may be present in one inbred or another to cross together, and then sorting out their progeny, so their offspring, and to find which genes might be present in what population or another. Now, that then turns into the next generation, which is breeding by design. And so we can use predictive analytics to say, this is what we want out of our next breeding project. You know, we want to breed a inbred that makes hybrids that are more tar spot tolerant or more drought tolerant, or maybe have particular characteristics that are desirable agronomically. And so, you know, we can design that up front and really start to then select out those plants that fit that design that we came up with in the front of things. And then finally, you know, we're in a global economy right now, and agriculture is now and has been for a while, a global market. And that's made its way into breeding as well. So the global supply chain behind breeding is now to the point where we're no longer doing just one generation a year of crossing and selfing of these inbreds and plants in development. We can now do two. You know, we do a North American generation and a South American generation, or even sometimes 3 or up to 4 generations in a single year, which really accelerates the progress of breeding. And if you put everything into a greenhouse, you can reliably do that through a lot of automation using the global supply chain to really help out in the development of new products.
So when you look out ahead and you have your dream of where you'd like to see genetics go, do you see corn eventually making its own nitrogen?
Making its own nitrogen?
I used to hear about that a lot.
You know, I don't think corn is ever by itself going to make its own nitrogen, but I do think that we will get to the point where we can find genes in corn that then can create a symbiotic relationship through the physiology of corn with some microbes that fix their own nitrogen. Mm-hmm. You know, like what we're seeing with some of these tune-up products, to where, you know, we may be able to supply the vast majority of corn with nitrogen through means other than fertilizer.
But the total need for nitrogen in corn isn't going to go away. Mm-hmm. From the standpoint, again, nitrogen is part of amino acids, which is part of protein. Protein builds every physical structure in that plant. So everything vegetatively, everything reproductively. So the more advancement and the higher performance we get out of corn, the more nitrogen it's going to have. Mm-hmm. And so, but how we deliver that nitrogen in multiple sources, whether it be symbiotically, whether it be biologically, or whether it be synthetically, are all going to become very important.
What do you see for innovations in our next generation of seed now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we're going to see a lot of innovations over the next generation, you know, with new technologies such as gene editing. So gene editing is going to fit really well into the current breeding paradigms we have today. And what we're going to see out of this are going to be some innovations that allow us to really modify the lines in ways that would be beneficial to farmers. That could be through increased disease resistance specifically, you know, such as tar spot or gray leaf spot. There are genes associated with northern corn leaf blight that we can incorporate into the systems to make them more tolerant to those diseases. But then also there's agronomic characteristics that, you know, would be, what if we want to make a really full season hybrid flower much earlier into the season and really extend out that grain fill term that the hybrid would be undergoing grain fill in and maximize yield performance. That could also allow us to take these really full season hybrids up farther north, you know, taking a 115-day hybrid from Nebraska into Minnesota, let's say. You know, then there's things that, you know, are underway right now or could easily be underway, and that would be end-use projects with corn, where we might take a really, really high-yielding hybrid, and turn it into a waxy hybrid. That's really hard to do just through traditional breeding because you have to go through so many generations. You could also do this with white corn or blue corn, any of those end-use things. But then finally, you can also think about those projects that would increase the feed-to-gain ratio for or improve the feed-to-gain ratio for cattle feeders. You use less feed to produce each pound of beef, or ultimately you could improve overall human health with projects where you may introduce alleles that would be good for human health through gene editing.
Excellent. All right, so now we're done with the growing season in 2023. Rob, what do you see coming up in 2024 on Future Farm?
So, I mean, again, I think we're gonna continue to investigate that intersection of plant genetics and biologicals and see what we can learn from that. We've done some research, kind of hybrid and variety interaction with various streamlined products. And I think we probably continue to do that. I think also a great opportunity to answer some questions that we get from the field. I'll just give you a couple examples. Number one, we've had observations using Tune-Up Plus soybeans next to non-treated soybeans that weren't treated with Tune-Up Plus soybeans, and we've seen a pretty dramatic difference in white mold. Not a lot of locations, but does Tune-Up Plus, for some reason, have an impact on white mold? I think another one that we've seen, I had a couple of these questions at a meeting that occurred just a couple days ago. I guess it was actually Monday. And that is residue release. We're getting a lot of anecdotal comments about greatly reduced volunteer corn in ground that's been treated with residue release the following fall, and greatly reduced flushes, weed flushes. Well, residue release is not approved for any kind of herbicidal activity, but we do have these comments coming in. It would be interesting, I think, to research does it have an impact? And so I think that would be, those are the kind of projects. I think another one we hear is, in the Western Corn Belt, Gauss's wilt is an issue and it's carried in the residue. If we control and degrade the residue with residue release, can we reduce or eliminate the risk of Gauss's wilt in particular fields? Those are just questions I think that we have an opportunity to answer.
I know while we have just a moment here before we wrap things up, you wanted to say a word of thanks, I think, to the partners that you had on Future Farm, some of the sponsorships that
I tell you
work
what,
with.
we have had great sponsors. I mean, they help fund this. They help put us in a position to do the research, to put on this program. And they've been great sponsors, and we truly appreciate their support. We couldn't do it without them. So we greatly appreciate that, the group of sponsors.
Well, it was great to have all you guys here. Rob, Jim, Todd, thanks for everything. I appreciate that so much. Really enjoyed it. And thank you for joining us on the Rob Seco Future Farm Special. Sure appreciate that. Well, good night from Rural America's most important network.